Hi. Hey, what's up, everybody? How you doing? This is Ari in the air. Thanks for being here. Sorry about the little technical difficulties I had trying to do this live stream the last couple of days. YouTube is not my specialty. Paragliding is my specialty. But today I'm here with your questions that so many of you have kindly and thoughtfully put into the comment section of the community posts. So today, I'm going to answer those questions for you. If you pop in here and have a question or a spin-off question, feel free to type it into the chat and I'll do my best to address it. There's a couple questions that I won't be addressing today that people commented. Things like, which glider should I buy? That's for another day. You can also check out how to pick a paraglider, a video I made on my YouTube channel. But today, it's 10 a.m. on Saturday. Went to a friend's birthday party last night, stayed up late, so I'm drinking coffee, and we can have just a little coffee and paragliding chat here, okay? So, I've made a list of all the questions, and we're gonna read them off, knock them all out. Ready? So, question number 1 comes from Riza. He says, I'm interested in acro paragliding. I'm 105 kgs. Is it better to practice with a wing that has a higher load range? For example, 100 to 160 kg? Would it be more manageable in stall, helico, etc.? I would say that acro has nothing to do with the glider. Pretty much. Acro doesn't have anything to do with the glider. You can do acro on any glider. I can do stalls and deep stall and tail slides and helis on my Xeno or on my tandem or on whatever. So if you want to learn acro, the most important thing is that you forget about the glider. Kind of like you do it on your B wing that you're not too heavy on, you're not too light on. That's your best bet. You don't have to get a new glider. Just practice stalls, just practice stalls over and over, stalls and stalls and stalls, hundreds of them. Okay, so don't worry about the glider. Next question comes from Johan in South Africa. He says, I paraglide in South Africa, and most of the time the sky is blue, like in your previous video. Any advice on how one might identify a good source of lift? You also mentioned you did not get lift where you thought you would get it. Okay, so how to identify sources of lift on a blue sky day where there's no clouds indicating? Yeah, so thermal triggers is a really deep conversation. What they are, why they are, where they come from, that kind of thing. So I would say any little piece of terrain, any change, any contrast in the terrain itself is actually a thermal trigger. When you're in the Alps, that looks like a gigantic mountain. And it's so obvious that it's a thermal trigger because it's, 5,000 feet tall and the sun is just baking on it. And so it's pretty obvious that that's a thermal trigger. In the flatlands, it's much more subtle. It can be something as simple as a telephone pole in the middle of a blank field, literally. It can also be a little tiny draw, like a little creek, or a little dimple. In the mountains, they're obvious. The ways to identify the lift is always going, the ways to identify where the lift is going to be is always relative to the angle of the sun, the direction of the wind, the angle of the slope, the aspect of the slope, the altitude. There's so many things that go into it. So there's no easy way for me to tell you where the lift is going to be. But as you fly more and more, you just get a better idea of where these things are going to be. and your guesses are more accurate more often, okay? The next part of the question, Johan, is when I think I know where it's going to be and I go there and it's not there, what to do then and what that means. Well, this is paragliding, folks. This is paragliding in a nutshell. It's essentially, what do I do when reality shows up differently than I expected it? And this is life. And this is such a transformational part of paragliding. What do we do when the atmosphere is different than we thought it was going to be? This happens all the time. This happens all the time. My advice, if I were to just give a succinct piece of advice for this, it is don't flounder in the place that you thought it was going to be because you thought it was going to be there. For instance, if I think it's going to be on a certain aspect of a mountain that I fly onto, and I fly there and it's not there, I'm not going to fly around and do circles and wait and look for it. I'm just going to keep going to the next thing, right? If I flounder around and fly circles and try, I'm basically just forcing my expectations onto the atmosphere, and that doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. Okay? So when it surprises you that it's not where you thought it was going to be, reevaluate. What's the next thing that where's the next point that you think it's going to be? And fly to that one. And then if it's not there, then what's the next point that you think it's going to be? And fly there. It's like, just keep going. Keep going. All right? Hope that helps. So next question. Dirtbird, and I like this one. Who's your biggest mentor? How did that come about? And what do you still try and learn from them? It's a great question. I think that I've been paragliding for 8 years, and so I have a number of different mentors for different types of flying, really. Like we got the Matt Hensies of cross country and competition flying. But at the base, like the foundational mentor that I've had, I would say his name is Sean Hasse, and he lives here in Bend. He's one of my best friends. It came about because he had been paragliding at Pine Mountain. He had been paragliding at Pine Mountain for 15 years when I started paragliding. And so how did that come about? So it came about because I came into paragliding stoked. If you watch one of my videos, it's called How to Learn Paragliding Cheap. I talk about this concept that I've talked about before, which is stoke as currency, like how you use your excitement, enthusiasm, and energy as a way to compensate other people for giving you their time, their knowledge, their advice, their guidance. And that's something that I did when I learned paragliding. I came in with so much energy and enthusiasm and stoke that the people who I met were really excited that there was fresh blood, that there was new people in the sport that were stoked, that wanted to learn and grow the community and these kinds of things. And so I think that's how that came about. And the things that I continue to learn from Sean, I would say, honestly, it's mostly lifestyle at this point. I think that we would both agree that my flying has surpassed his. And so the things I learned from Sean, he's a family man. He has 4 children and a wife, and really takes such good care of them. And so the things I learned from Sean are about manhood, and they're about how to be, and they're about keeping the whole thing going and on the rails. So I really appreciate that in him. Okay, next question. This is also from Dirtbird. Hold on one second. Excuse me there. I had to let my big dog in the house. Okay. Next question from Dirtbird. What's the difference in glider behavior between a stall from minimum speed, trim speed, and a dynamic stall? This is such a good question. Who's this Dirtbird guy? And he asks great questions. Okay. What's the difference in glider behavior between a stall from min speed, trim speed, and dynamic? Okay. I guess first we could just talk about what this is, what we're talking about here. Basically, if you are going to do a full stall and you grab the brakes and you pull them way down and you wait, now you're at minimum speed. If you then stall the glider, that's like a minimum speed stall. Trim speed is letting it fly and just going straight into a stall. And a dynamic full stall is where we build up the energy, whether through wingovers or spiraling or asymmetric spiral or any way that we can build up the energy. That's dynamic full stall. So what's the difference in glider behavior? It all has to do with energy and how far in front of the glider you go. In paragliding, we typically talk about it as the glider went behind me, but that's actually not what happens because the glider doesn't go behind you, you go in front of the glider, right? So if you're flying along and you have the energy, you slow your glider down and stall it, you keep going. That's what gives the pendulum motion, is the inertia that your body and harness have. So what's the difference? You're going to go further in front of your glider. And that means that you have more potential energy so that when you come under the glider can shoot harder. So the more energy you let into a stall, the more prepared you need to be to manage that energy. So when you do your first full stalls over water with an instructor, the instructor will have you pull the brakes down like this, wait, and then 3, 2, 1, stuff the glider. And that's a good idea because it just manages your pendulum. So you slow the glider down and you're slowed, and then you stall it and the glider goes, and then there it is. When you do a dynamic full stall, you get, I get above my glider sometimes on a dynamic full stall. So there's a ton of energy to manage there. But the glider behavior itself is pretty similar. It's pretty similar, but it just is more energy to manage. That's a good question from Dirtbird. Okay. Next one. This is from Steve. He says, when you're on glide, do you like to go on bar to minimize time spent between climbs, or do you find minimum sync the better way to go? If the former, is it hairy to get off bar and get turning without overshooting the thermal? Thank you. Okay. This is a question that is referring to the concept in paragliding that we call speed to fly. Speed to fly is basically the question of how much speed bar should I be using at any given time. Very important question and concept. And I think that actually this is so important and so nuanced that I'm actually today, after I finish this, I will record a spiel about speed to fly, about how much speed bar to use. The short answer is it's complicated. The short answer is it's complicated. Speed to fly basically refers to the idea that if you're going up, say you're in 3 meters a second lift, what do? You pull on the brakes and you turn circles, right? Turning circles is the slowest that you can go. Slowing the glider down with the brakes, turning circles, that's as slow as you can go. If you're in 4 meters a second sink, what do? You push full speed bar. Okay, so from -4 to +4, let's just call that our spectrum. If we're going up +4, then we slow down and we turn circles. If we're going down -4, we push full speed bar. So at the most basic, we can talk about speed to fly as the spectrum of lift as it relates to how fast we should be flying, or how fast we should be flying as it relates to the lift that we're in, or sink, right? It gets a little bit more complex when you talk about headwind or tailwind, because if you're flying in a strong tailwind, then I won't push as much speed bar because I'll let the wind carry me, right? It also gets more complex when you talk about competition, because competition, I'm going to go a bit faster than if I'm just flying cross country. It also gets a bit more complex when we start talking about the day at large. So it is known that if the average thermal climb that you're getting is 4 meters a second, then the most efficient way to fly between thermals is full speed. If the climbs are 4 meters a second, then full speed between the climbs will get you there faster, and you'll be able to climb up before the person who flew trim speed will catch you. So it's a complex thing, but in general, if you're in sync, you fly faster. If you're in lift, you fly slower, right? Slow in lift, fast in sync. From -4 full speed bar to +4 turn circles, it's pretty much a spectrum between those two things. Okay, hope that helps. Next question. This is from Sarah. Sarah says, I've done a bunch of SIVs and probably 100 stalls. I want to practice my stalls more, but I'm feeling limited to SIVs. How can I safely transition from practicing them over water to over land at my local site? This is an incredibly good question. I've done a bunch of SIVs and I want to practice my stalls. How do I safely transition from practicing over water to over land at my local site? Okay, a couple thoughts on this one. First of all, I would say you need to start practicing your box considerations. Where is your box? I think the video that I've made that I would refer you to is how to learn acro. In that video, we talk about box choices. Your box is anywhere you feel comfortable throwing your reserve. Anytime you're going to do acrobatics, you need to, or even a stall, you need to think, if I screw this up, what's going to happen? If I screw it up and have to throw my reserve, where will I land? If I land there, what's the chance that I'll be hurt? If I'm hurt, what will happen? Who will get me? How will they get there? These are all incredibly important considerations if you're going to start doing acrobatics. Paragliding is very dangerous. Acrobatics are even more dangerous. So you got to start really the first thing if you want to start transitioning out of SIV, which is a environment where you have an instructor who's going to kind of like take on part of your workload cognitively for you, to where you're doing this all on your own and you're deciding where you are going to do it and how high and all these things. So you're going to have to start considering your box. That's your altitude. That's your drift of the wind under a reserve parachute. That's where you'll land. That's how people will get to you. That's, is there a first aid kit on the ground? Is there a backboard on the ground? Is there a rope rescue kit on the ground? These are all things you got to think about as a acro pilot, right? Because acro is more about discipline and restraint than it is about maneuvers, okay? So having said that, that's kind of like the, how do you start considering doing new things or practicing acrobatics and stalls over the dirt? Your box considerations, your altitude, where, how, what happens after this, thinking through all of the possibilities of what could possibly happen is the first step. That's bringing you up to speed. I guess I would call that getting into right relationship with the level of risk that you're actually going to take. Step one. Step two is probably some kind of progression. It's probably some kind of progression. definitely includes visualization. So I would recommend that if you're going to do your first stall over dirt, you're going to do it almost like your first stall over the water, where you are going to take the glider to minimum speed, slow it down, stall it assertively so that it's symmetric, and you're going to take it all the way into tail slide so that your chance of the glider shooting and cravating or something is eliminated. That's what I'd say. Yeah, start with the most controllable stall configuration you can. That might be a beeline stall, your first one. It's probably not a deep stall. It's probably not your little little two-step break it, toss it, let it shoot thing. Those are probably for later. You probably want to start over in your stall progression, essentially. Like if you're going to start doing them over the dirt, like take it seriously and start back with the thing that you're most comfortable with and that you have thought through the most, done the most, that kind of thing. Another thought on the progression here is you might want to consider doing some other things before you do that first stall. If you're not comfortable with some other safer maneuvers in that box that we talked about, then you probably might want to start there. Things like asymmetric collapses, take your A riser and pull it down in the box, And things like full frontals, things like spins, all these different things might help build up the progression to the stall in the box, because you definitely want to give your head a bit of time to acclimate to the new level of risk and the new environment that you're in. So give yourself time, choose your box wisely, start back in your progression. Don't just jump to the last thing you did on your last run in SIV, because you haven't been doing that recently. So definitely take a couple steps back and start working your way up into this progression, because now you're on your own. You make your own decisions. You have to really consider your own risk. And that's a huge step in paragliding. It really is. It's not to be underestimated to be, flying the coop here, jumping out of the nest of the safety of having an instructor watching over you in a safety boat and those kinds of things. So that's a great question. Thank you so much, Sarah. I hope that's a helpful answer. Okay, last question I have here. I got two more. And I want to start with the more technical question. This is from French Flies. I would enjoy hearing more of a discussion around flat turns. I think there's a lot of misconception of what they are in the community. Some people try to do flat and tight, but that just leads to collapses or stalls because the wing is slowed so much. From what I have seen great pilots do, flat turns are a lot wider though. Okay, so let's talk about flat turns for a second. Flat turns. Okay, there's a couple things here. We can talk about the radius of the turn. How wide is the damn thing? We can also talk about different techniques that we use to keep the glider from rolling inside. When it rolls, it pitches. When it pitches, you pendulum up into it and you just lose efficiency. So, okay. So the radius of the turn. In Mastering Paragliding, Kelly Farina recommends the 4 seconds for every 90 degrees of rotation, totaling a 360 at around 16 seconds. That's kind of the optimum and average turn duration of the thermaling turn. So it's really difficult for us to talk about the radius of a turn in any kind of distance, because when we're flying, we have a very hard time understanding distance, right? We're in the sky, we can't tell. So we talk about it in time. So when you start that turn, 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000, 4 1000, that's only 90 degrees. So a 16-second full turn, that's about the average. A tight turn might start dipping 10 seconds, 10 seconds is a pretty tight turn. And then a really flat, really wide turn, we're probably looking at 20 seconds, okay? So those are kind of like, that's kind of the range of like how big turns should be when you're thermaling. I would say that the biggest turn that is reasonable when you're thermaling is a no brake, weight shift only turn. And I have been in thermals that are just totally smooth and totally consistent. And all you do is you just weight shift over and you just stay in the thermal and you're just going up and up and up. As far as what you do with the brakes to make these flat turns, this becomes a little bit different. So sometimes I will be using the maximum amount of weight shift that I can. I will be pulling inside brake to instigate more turn. And then I will be using the outside brake in time to check the outside so that when it wants to kind of start rolling over or pitching forward because of all of this weight shift and inside brake that I'm giving it, I can slow the outside wing down and it'll keep that turn flatter. I think the most efficient way to turn your glider is with the least amount of brake that you can use to get the turn that you're trying to get. Obviously, you need to use the brakes to make the turn, but the least amount of brake that you can use to make it turn how you want it to turn is the right amount. And sometimes you really want it to turn and you use a lot of brake to make it happen. Sometimes you really want it to turn and you use a lot of inside brake, and then subsequently you use a lot of outside brake to keep the outside wing from shooting, from pitching and rolling, and that will make your turn flatter as well. This is something that you can practice when you're soaring. Go to your local site, and when you're following the ridge one way and you're going to do a 180-degree turn the other, you can weight shift into the turn and pull that brake. And as the wing starts to come around, you can slow the outside wing down and just practice making your turns flatter and flatter. It's also easy practice to start counting the duration of the radius of your turns. That way you can start kind of understanding, okay, if Kelly Farina, one of the best instructors ever, is saying that 16 is the average, then what is this current turn? And if you come up on 12, you're like, well, maybe I can turn a little slower. If you come up on 20, you're like, I need to turn faster. So getting a feel for this, and even myself, I've done this. I've counted my turns to see where I am in accordance with that. And at this point now, I have a pretty good idea. I don't really have to count to know whether I should be turning tighter or flatter. Okay? I hope that's helpful. I'm not convinced it is, but I hope it is. Okay, last question here. Extreme Stunts and David had two pretty similar questions. And they said, what's your most memorable flight and what's your best paragliding memory? Most memorable flight and best paragliding memory. It's really hard to say. I've been paragliding for 8 years and something between 1,500 and 2,000 flight hours. And most memorable flight. Honestly, the first things that come up are the ones where I almost crashed or got really scared. Those are the ones that are kind of seared into my memory. My YouTube channel, there's the scariest flight ever. That one's pretty memorable. Also, my longest flight ever, 245K, that was quite memorable. I also have a lot of memories of the first competition task I ever did. That's a good one. Ended up crying at the end of that one when I just tried so hard for so long and then landed the glider in a blackberry bush. That was tough. Best paragliding memory. I think the best paragliding memory I have is the first time I ever did a misty flip. Those first couple runs at Lake Garda where I did Misty flips and I just lost my fucking mind. It was so cool. It was one of the best feelings I'd ever had. It was something I had built up in my mind and I wanted for so long and that I'd worked towards, and it just came so easy on the first couple of tries. And I think that was one of my best memories ever. And that is, like the intro clip of the channel is, oh my God, I love paragliding. That's that moment. So I'm happy to share that with you. But yeah, I hope this is helpful. If you watch this and you think, oh, I have some other questions, let's put them in the comments below. I'll definitely do another one of these Q&A. Hopefully on the next live stream, I can actually do it at the time that I said the first time, and I won't have to drag you guys around. I apologize for the technical / clerical / I went and climbed a mountain yesterday excuses that I have for not doing these on time like I can. So thanks so much for watching. Consider becoming a patron on Patreon if you've watched this far. Really appreciate that. That's patreon.com/airy in the air. We'll see you on the next episode. Great stuff coming up. I'm going to make that speed to fly video right now. All right. Peace.